I think it's fair to say racists vote for right-wing parties. So in other words, not everyone who votes right is racist, but everyone who's racist seems to vote right. You don't get too many racists wanting to jump in with, what so many people deem the woke left and the Māori Party and the Greens. That's not where they sit. Say it again, not saying everyone on the right's like that, but if you are like that, you typically are on the right. I'll say typically because I'm being generous. I probably could say exclusively, but I do find it hard to use absolute. So I'm going to say typically for the sake of the conversation.
I think it's better just not to use those absolutes, right? Because there's some pretty hefty racism behind Labour and the Democrats, for example, that could be just as analysed as we're going to do with the Nats.
So let's have a look. And some of you have probably seen the story going around today. There was a Facebook post done by Christopher Luxon. We haven't talked about him tonight yet, have we? And on that Facebook post, there was a huge pushback against Christopher Luxon not even speaking, but putting up a Māori message in Māori for a Māori leader. All right, so the first thing we're going to have a look at, the first clip here is to give you the gist if you haven't seen it yet, is the response that Christopher Luxon gave to Breakfast this morning about this.
But before we do, I want to talk about racism, and I know that this is something that's come up in the last couple of days for you. There's been some controversy around your Facebook page, tribute to the late Dr. Joe Hawke. You began with a beautiful mihi in te reo Māori, and there were a number of different responses, many of them quite racist, to be perfectly honest, many of them saying that you have lost their vote. How do you feel about those comments?
Well, look, I mean, for me, Joe Hawke was a great New Zealander. He was a...
Just not to cut this off, just think, the question has been asked, how do you feel about those comments, right? That's the question that was asked. How do you, Mr. Luxon, feel about those disgusting comments that were on your Facebook page? That's the question, right? Have that in your mind.
Great leader in Māoridom, and I felt it was entirely appropriate that I acknowledge his passing in te reo. I'm also a student of te reo. I'm just started learning. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I appreciate not everyone wants to do that. But from my point of view, I didn't see all the comments. If I read every comment online, I'd sort of be on there every day, all day. I was told that some of the comments were racist, and I condemn that outright. From my point of view, also, I didn't think a lot of the comments were just people expressing their point of view and their opinion as well. And and as I said, from my point of view, Joe spoke te reo. It was his primary language, and I thought it was entirely appropriate that I used te reo in that way.
Have you pushed back on those comments? Will you?
Well, I've been answering the questions that you're asking, just now.
No, he didn't answer the question. He said some of the comments were racist, and I condemn those. So to me, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he didn't actually answer the comment, which was, "What do you think about those racist comments?" He said, "Well, some were racist, and I condemn them." That's it. End of conversation. So I don't feel like that's necessarily been answered. Whereas now he's saying, "I have answered that question. I've answered it right now."
Giving my point of view very clearly about it, which is, for me,
I
Joe
guess
was a great leader in Māoridom. We should acknowledge him that way.
Wouldn't it send a powerful message about tolerating racism or not tolerating it? Also, not to mention, show really strong leadership in this space. That this isn't acceptable.
Jenny, I think I've been really clear about it. As I said to you, there were some comments that were racist, and I condemn those outright. But there were other comments. The vast majority were directed at me, and they were people expressing their point of view. As I said, what I was trying to do was acknowledge Joe and te reo. I thought it was really important, and it was the right thing to do.
So, I'm not saying it's the same. I want to make that clear. But there is a vibe of there was very fine people on both sides. Donald Trump about the riots and about the white supremacists. There was very fine people on both sides. There is a vibe of it about that, and that's sort of what we want to talk about. And I'd actually really rather not have this as an example of Christopher Luxon, because I think it's about people who vote on the right versus the person who's at the front of the right political party. Do you know what I mean, George?
Well, I mean, the election of his party depends on a racial undercurrent. I think that's pretty obvious, right? That he depends on that.
So when he says as well in that second part of the conversation, the vast majority of comments were directed at me, right? That's what he said. The follow-up question should have been, why were they directed at you? What did you do to have them directed at you? And the answer is, wrote a message in Māori. It's kind of like saying, if my wife was Māori and someone was hurling racial abuse at me, that's okay. Because it's not aimed at my wife, it's aimed at me. But it's aimed at me because of my wife. The vast amount of comments that were aimed at Christopher Luxon, that he kind of fobbed it off, though they're all about me, it was about me. It was about you because you wrote a message in Māori. So it's about the Māori language. Yeah,
that's a very common cover for the right when it comes to the sort of thing you bring up Trump. This is related here as well. It's like, that's just their opinion, right? That's just they're exercising their right to say their opinion. Like that sort of somehow magically cancels out the fact that it's racist.
And here's the follow-up question. Here's the follow-up question that didn't get asked. Are you prepared, Mr. Luxon, to say right now to people who think that only English should be spoken in New Zealand that you do not want their votes? Because that's actually, if you want to push back at the racist, not even undertones, but blatant racism that's happening in those comments, that's the only appropriate response. If you believe that English is the only language that should be spoken in this land, I do not want your vote. Do not vote for us. But of course, unfortunately, that question was not asked, and it probably never will be. Let's just have a look at what the actual comments were. It would be appropriate for people to know what was being said. Here's an article. We do actually have the post right here from Christopher Luxon, and if you want to have a look at it, let's zoom in a bit and you can see. He gave a message on the passing of a great Māori leader, Joe Hawke, and did it in Māori, Beautiful,
Can I just
wonderful.
quickly say that I know this is sort of unrelated, but it is where the story has started. That this reminds me of like when American politicians, use lines from Martin Luther King Jr. or that sort of thing to further their interest. This kind of seemed like that. Imagine if Luxon was the leader of the National Party during the Bastion Point occupation. Yeah. I don't think he'd be, doing this sort of glowing thing about Mr. Hawke. In fact, we've had examples of occupations of land disagreement, land occupations, that sort of thing since Bastion Point, where I'm sure you'd find Christopher Luxon would not be as sympathetic here and give this glowing sort of thing. I just wanted to point that out.
Or if not Christopher Luxon, whoever the leader of the National Party was.
Yeah.
Because maybe it was under John Key, or maybe it was under Bill English, or maybe it was under Simon Bridges. Because remember, he has only been here for 5 minutes to give him his dues and that sort of thing as well. Look, the post is there. You can go look at Christopher Luxon's Facebook page, which I've still got access to, ironically, if you like. But here's the story I tell Māori News, and we're showing the story instead just because it's snapped out some of the goods and bads comments. So some of the comments are like, fantastic, you're posting it today, good on you, good on politicians, kudos to you, kia kaha Chris. But you come to the other comments, which are, according to Māori News, it looks like they're vastly more. And these are some of the things that are on the Facebook post. This is what we're sort of talking about. Really, Chris, why are you trying to placate the minority by talking Māori? Joe Hawke was not in any way great to a lot of New Zealanders. Another one, stop talking and pandering to a minority. You just lost my vote. Speak English. For fuck's sake, so sick of Māori stuff. This person says, please, English only. Perhaps this once is okay. Giving permission for Christopher Luxon to speak Māori just one time, and I'll let it slide. I'll let it slide this one time. By using Māori language, Chris, you are no better than Labour, dividing the population and losing votes. Why the hell don't tell me, don't tell me National is falling for this Labour crap. Most New Zealanders speak English. Quite frankly, sick of all this te reo. It's actually quite nice that they've put te reo in there. Do you know what I mean? They could have said Maori, but they've actually put sick of all this te reo, which is kind of, there's a strange juxtaposition there. Quite frankly, sick of all this te reo push on TV and radio, and now you. I was born and bred here in New Zealand 65 years ago and was taught English at school. Why are we trying to change now? It's of no use outside New Zealand. I'm going to come back to that point in a second. Yeah. Maybe if this was in English, I would understand what you were saying. Well, I guess for a couple of things, that last comment, the message is probably not for you. So respectfully, who cares?
I mean, he does have it in English.
He says some things in English as well, but it was for Joe Hawker's whānau, his family, and those who knew him. This thing about it's no use of outside New Zealand. Do you know that other than perhaps German, Mandarin, maybe Spanish, maybe French, no native language is really of any use outside their own country? You know, do you think Fijian has a commercial value somewhere else in the world? No. You know, do you in any of those languages, some of the dialects of parts of Asia from the smaller nations, Indonesian probably doesn't have much of a commercial value outside of Indonesia. It's an absolutely ridiculous conversation. And let me tell you, Māori has a huge commercial value within this country. I don't care what field of work you're in. If you were fluent in te reo Māori, you would be at the top of many lists for employment, assuming that your skill set is good enough to get that job. So this bullshit about this Māori language has no value is utter horse crap. It always has been, and it always will be. You know what? So learning Māori is not going to help you if you go live in Canada. Fair enough. Where do you live at the moment? Was it New Zealand? No.
Yeah.
Could be quite useful then. Other thing about learning the native language is it teaches you about the land you live in. Doesn't matter what you think, right? Doesn't matter what you think. All those people there, it doesn't matter what you think. If you are part of this land, if you are part of this nation, then the Māori story is in part your story. Might not be through your story through your bloodline, but it's part of the story of this land. And that means it's a part of your story. And if you reject it, then you're basically rejecting the story of the land you live in.
Yeah, it's such a soulless way of thinking about language, right? So I think if we try and tackle people like that on their terms, in terms of its whatever its instrumental value or its commercial value, then sometimes, you know, we're sort of discounting or taking the soul out of language or the culture out of language, and as you say quite rightly, the place out of language.
Yeah. So the other thing about this is, are these comments racist? Now, think about this for yourself. Let's say the French president had just died, and one of our leaders sent a message to the French people and did the first 4 or 5 or 6 lines in French. Nobody would bat an eyelid, right? If the Fijian president or prime minister had just died, just pick any country with any other language. If Christopher Luxon sent a message to those people, to that government, and the first few lines were in that native tongue of that country, this wouldn't be a conversation. No one would bat an eyelid. It's because it's Māori that it becomes a big issue, and that's where it becomes racist. We've talked about this numerous times. When David Seymour focuses on we should all be equal no matter what race you are, the reason it comes off as racist, and I continue to say comes off as rather than is, and that's a choice I'm making, is because the only area that David Seymour focuses on that he wants to see equality is race. There are many other areas we could choose to see equality, just like there are many other languages we could put a fuss up about if one of our leaders used it, but typically we don't. When I say we, I mean you guys, the people who have put those comments on, only focus on Māori as being an issue when our leaders speak it. And if that's what the case is, like if you didn't have a problem if it was in Italian because the Pope had just died, or if it was in German because something happened to Angela Merkel or whatever, then that's where your racism comes in, right? If it's just because it's about Māori, that's where your issues come in, and that's when that hits. Sorry again, George, I'm on a bit of a bandstand here. You got more to come in?
No, it's all good. I got it all that.
All right, let's do another clip here. This is from also the AM show where a similar question was asked, and Melissa here does really well because she really wants Mr. Luxon to either say they are or aren't racist comments.
The comments that were there that were saying that you shouldn't have been using Te Reo, that were anti-Te Reo, are those comments racist?
Look, I mean, from my point of view, you know, Joe Hawke was a great leader. He made a great contribution to New Zealand and to Māoridom. He's someone I respected in terms of how he went about his work.
Wasn't the question.
I thought it was entirely appropriate to acknowledge Joe in Te Reo. I'm learning Te Reo myself. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and it's my choice. It doesn't mean everybody else has to do it, but I've chosen to do it, and so I felt it was entirely appropriate. But obviously, I haven't seen all the comments, but I condemn racism in all its forms, and so for me, yeah, I should feel free to. I thought it was entirely appropriate to acknowledge Joe in that way.
Are anti-Te Reo comments racist?
Look, we can't tolerate racism in New Zealand, full
Are
stop.
those
I think
comments
we should be
racist?
free to be able to. Well, some of them were just, abuse at me, to be honest, about, not
And
wanting
again, they were abuse at you because you were using Te Reo Māori.
to
But
deal
if,
with...
if people are saying that they don't want you to use Te Reo, is that a racist comment?
I think it's not appropriate. Yeah, I just think it's not necessary, those comments.
Wow.
If I'm choosing to use Te Reo because I think it was appropriate for that situation, and I'm interested in using more Te Reo, I think I made the right call.
National Party leader Christopher Luxon, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
So
Prime Minister's
there you
meeting
go.
with...
Let's turn that off. So pulling teeth. Couldn't get it
Wow.
off. Wouldn't get past it. Sorry, one of my children is just phoning me. I was going to hang up on them. And would not say it. Now, this is the second part of this conversation. Remember, we started this by not wanting to talk about necessarily this being an issue to do with, that's for Paul, because Paul loves the dog cam. See, Paul just said, love the sweet dog cam. Necessarily to do with Mr. Luxon, although he's trying pretty hard to make it about him when he refuses to answer those questions, yeah? But it's to do with the right, and the right is typically where racists sit. And what Mr. Luxon, and Trump did it, right? And I'm not comparing necessarily Luxon to Trump, very different people. But the problem that the right faces is they need to placate the racists to get their vote whilst distancing themselves from what they say. Which is why I've said again, the response from any journalist from here on in, if you guys are watching, I know you are, is do you right now, Mr. Luxon, want to say to anybody who thinks Te Reo Māori should not be spoken in this land, that only English should be spoken, do you want to say that they should not vote for you? Because that should be getting asked of Christopher Luxon, because that's the way that we actually get a clear answer from him. And I've done this before, not to say yay me or anything like that, but I've seen other people who have done it. You just stay on that one question, and Melissa basically was doing that for a while, staying on that one question, not letting them not answer it. And it's a political game where they actually will not answer the question that you ask them.